Tonight, 6 Democratic presidential hopefuls will debate in Iowa, less than 3 weeks ahead of that state's caucus. Steyer, Warren, Biden, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar. This is the smallest group to debate so far, and joining us to preview tonight's debate, CBS 46 political analyst Dr. Rashad Richey. Always good to talk to you, Rashad.
Thanks for coming in.
This went from being one of the most diverse fields to suddenly being a very white field of candidates, right?
Yeah, let's be very clear. This is the whitest Democratic presidential debate we've had so far. And keep this in mind, the DNC and the Democratic platform is a platform of diversity. That is why this becomes a political black eye to many of the candidates and to the DNC at large. So watch for their strategy, their messaging to change from racial diversity to thought and philosophy and ideology diversity.
You think it's the DNC and their rules, their criteria that has made this field so small and so white?
Well, based on a lot of the conversation from Senator Cory Booker before he dropped out of the race, and even Senator Harris before she dropped out of the race, they thought some of these rules were quite restrictive to minority candidates.
This is the final time these candidates will face off before the first votes are cast in Iowa and New Hampshire. Those, of course, are the early primary states when the field tends to narrow even more. I mean, a lot of candidates that don't do well in those two states, they're going to be dropping out of the race. What does your crystal ball tell you?
Well, Iowa is important, but Iowa is not an end-all to the candidacy of any presidential candidate. Now, remember, the Iowa caucuses, they are based not in the same way as a primary, because a primary, everyone gets to participate. You go in, you go out, and you can go back to work. Well, in the Iowa caucuses, you basically have to stay there all day, which really restricts who can participate in that caucus process, so you don't get a full view of how Iowa feels holistically, but you definitely get a segment.
Okay, so finally here, we know that President Trump's base is on board with him. An amazing amount of support among people who identify as Republican voters for the President of the United States. What about with Democrats? Where is the enthusiasm level? Because they're going to need it if they're going to beat Donald Trump.
I got to tell you, based on polling data, Rick, the greatest motivating factor for Democratic voters is actually President Trump. Based on polling, Democrats feel as if the electability argument or your ability to beat Trump is their motivating factor, and they are looking tonight for electability politics, not just likability.
And you talk about the African-American vote, obviously a group of voters very crucial here in this part of the state.
Yes.
What about their support for which candidate and how enthusiastic they are in the group that we still have?
Well, right now, Joe Biden is still basically polling at number one. He's roughly at about 50% of African-American voters. That is going to help him in Georgia, South Carolina, and other states. But remember, that also means that there's a split on the other side. So if other candidates continue to drop out, see that number, it will tighten up as the race continues.
Dr. Rashad Richey, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Rick.
And among those debating tonight, the latest Monmouth University poll shows former Vice President Biden in the lead among likely Democratic caucus goers, as Rashad just told us. And then it's neck and neck, really, between Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, and Elizabeth Warren. How do you think those three can break out of the pack? Is that possible?
Well, it is possible, but it's all about electability.
All right. Rashad, thanks very much.